Hello, folks. Right now, throughout the this period of quarantining and shutdown on account of the coronavirus pandemic, there are reports that there are significant increases of domestic violence cases, domestic violence arrests. Generally speaking, domestic violence cases are prosecuted very aggressively, including during this time period. A lot of people are under the misconception that just because there is a quarantine or shutdown that the police have stopped arresting. That is insane and misguided. That isn't the case at all. And just because an arrest isn't happening currently to you on account of a recent domestic violence incident, that means absolutely nothing. The statutes of limitations provide prosecutors with very wide latitude. And that means that several years oftentimes can go by and you can still be prosecuted. So anyway, this is a good opportunity to talk about exactly how domestic violence cases work. Unfortunately, in many cases, how easy it is to get arrested for domestic violence when you thought it was just a mundane spat or dispute. Certain words, certain physical gestures are exchanged, and before you know it, you're in a jail cell. And right now, without exaggerating, I can safely say that going into custody is effectively a death sentence for anything, regardless of what it is. I'm talking about pretrial custody, to the degree that the confined and crammed nature of incarceration necessarily exponentially increases the likelihood that you're going to get infected. And it's a humongous death rate. Even if you don't die, you're looking at potential pulmonary complications for the rest of your life, diminished pulmonary capacity. So it's important. You got to take into account all of the potential consequences, obviously health-wise, and we're going to get into what the consequences are legally. Okay, so if you're not a citizen, you're going to get deported. You'll end up with a permanent criminal record. You won't have firearm rights. You'll probably lose custodial rights. If there are children involved, you'll be subject to a criminal protective order that can last for many years and can be very difficult to undo. You'll have to pay restitution to the victim that can be exponentially large. If there are medical expenses associated with that, you'll have to attend a domestic violence class. It's a 52-week program. And obviously there is incarceration, including in state prison in certain felony cases. Okay. Now, not every conflict between two people obviously is domestic violence. The victim has to be of a particular species of victim, a particular classification as to who counts as a victim. So, for example, so effectively, it's any sort of abuse leveled against an intimate partner. That's kind of vague, but the penal code lists it. Okay, so that could be a current or former spouse, a current or former fiance, someone you were engaged to, a current or former registered domestic partner, somebody that you lived with, a live-in romantic partner, somebody you cohabitated with, someone that you seriously even dated, even without engagement. There's no requirement you have to have lived with the person. Any sort of romantic liaison, and then finally someone that you had a child with. Okay. All right. So the family code is also involved, and it has a longer list even of people who can be deemed to be victims of domestic violence. So in addition to that list that I read to you, it can also be the child of the person that you are accused of having inflicted domestic battery or domestic violence on. But if it's just you hurting the child, that's also going to be domestic violence, and probably also child endangerment. The penalties I sort of touched on. Now, the penalties can vary as to whether it's going to be a felony or a misdemeanor. So there are factors that are taken into consideration. The circumstances of the offense, your criminal record is going to play a huge role in terms of where the prosecutor wants to take this case, if it's going to be a felony or a misdemeanor. Obviously, if you have past offenses, especially this type, be prepared to get hit with a felony accusation. There's also an enhancement called a GBI, enhancement great bodily injury, assault with a deadly weapon, assault with the likelihood of inflicting great bodily injury. It's a strike. Strike is a very dangerous thing to have on your record, because it can lead up to, once you pick up certain amount of convictions, you're looking at potentially life in prison. Very dangerous to have. All right, so now let's get into the defenses. Okay, now the defenses are actually not that different from other offenses involving violence, to the degree that, self-defense is one. I have to tell you, that's probably one of the weaker ones that I've seen, especially between men and women. Generally speaking, prosecutors and courts are loath to really believe the self-defense strategy. I mean, unless it's overwhelmingly evident that the person, especially if it's a male, that's what I'm talking about. Generally speaking, that just doesn't have a high degree of credibility. Okay, but it happens. I think a more credible one would be if you were defending your child. You beat up your partner because your partner was beating up your child, the defense of third party. Just in my experience handling so many of these cases, I find that to be more effective, but the facts have to substantiate that, obviously. I think in these cases, probably the most powerful defense is the credibility of the accusing party. Is this somebody who has leveled accusations against you or somebody else in the past? Do they have a record of, have they ever filed a false police report? Have they ever filed a restraining order that didn't go anywhere? Have they ever accused somebody else and that never became a criminal charge? So that could be somebody with a pattern of doing that. It can damage their credibility tremendously. The prosecutor can lose confidence in their case against you. I think that's probably one of the more powerful approaches in defending this sort of case. That's and the reason I say that is because in many of these cases, there's really, it's so he said, she said in terms of the dynamic. And there's not always, and I'm going to talk about the injuries in just a moment, there aren't always injuries that are evident. So when that's the case and it's just a verbal accusation, it becomes all that much more important to have an investigator, I'm going to put it bluntly, to dig up dirt on this person. Is this somebody who can even be believed? Is this a believable witness, or is this somebody who is prone? Does this person have the proclivity to tell lies about their romantic partner? As far as the injuries are concerned, I recently had a case, in fact, like what I'm about to tell you, but I had a case where my client is accused of having pulled his wife's hair, and she lost a big patch of hair from her scalp. But as it turns out, we were able to find evidence that there is a postpartum hormonal disorder that causes hair loss. And in fact, that's precisely what happened to the victim. So, the prosecutor, their case suffered significantly on account of that, because suddenly the causation, the element needed to show that my client was responsible for that injury, it went up in smoke. So it's very important to have investigation early on, to dig up dirt, and also to be imaginative and to think outside the box and look into potential medical non-assault, non-domestic violence explanations that are credible and rooted in science and medicine for the alleged injuries that happened to the victim. Okay, give us a call. If you're accused of something like this, like I said, at this time, in 2020, but in the foreseeable future, going into custody it's virtually a death sentence. At minimum, you're going to be exposed to a high viral load from other inmates who might, with whom you're going to be sharing the space. If any of them are, if they have the disease, if they have coronavirus. So if it was important before to do everything in your power to stay out of custody, out of prison, out of jail, it's 100 times more important now to avoid that for your health, for your well-being. Take care.